This week on the Stephen Herreid Show.
It's because we're a small state, we're a one-party state, that one party's the Democrat Party. They can get the most bang for their buck. They're treating Hawaii as a laboratory.
We have to fight back. Jason Jones explains how Democrats are quietly using a bill in Hawaii to mainstream doctor-assisted suicide nationwide. Is everything going great for religious liberty?
It's been a good week for religious liberty, yes.
Two major victories for religious liberty this week. CatholicVote's own Josh Mercer explains.
A whole movement is being created from this one accidental tweet.
This one's for you, Planned Parenthood. We're joined by Deanna Falchook, a real-life Disney princess who had an abortion and now fights for life. Well, you heard it right in the intro, Catholic Vote Radio Hour listeners. This is now the Stephen Herreid Show from Catholic Vote, and you're viewing it and listening to it. You may have noticed recently there's been some lag and maybe some shorter episodes in recent weeks. Well, that's because we've been working hard to bring you this exciting new project. But don't worry, the Catholic Vote Radio Hour is the Stephen Herreid Show, and the Stephen Herreid Show is the Catholic Vote Radio Hour. The only difference is now you can view us and not only listen to us, and you can continue to listen to this on iTunes and Google Play. It's just that now you can also watch it on YouTube, and now you can see the beautiful faces of all of our guests. So without further ado, this is the Stephen Herreid Show, the show that's so Catholic, the Pope is resigning and letting us take over for a while. I'm your host, Stephen Herreid. I'm joined now by Jason Jones. He's the head of the Vulnerable Peoples Project, and his work can be found at thegreatcampaign.org. First of all, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Stephen.
So, what is going on? You're in Hawaii, and it is currently, unfortunately, ground zero for a new major progressive push, their new priority, which is physician-assisted suicide, which they call something like happy times death or something, Orwellian euphemism, right?
They're all Orwellian euphemisms. And it is ground zero. And this time it's not a false alarm. It's not North Korea. It's money from the mainland of the United States. We call it the mainland. This is the islands. You all are the mainland.
Right.
And so this is money from out of the state. Yeah. That has for over 2 decades now been aggressively pushing for physician-assisted suicide. Mm-hmm. And it has been every other legislative session or so a big battle. But now it has passed the House, it has passed the Senate, right, and it is on its way to the governor's desk. And our governor, Governor Ige, has said he's eager to sign it. Now, something you need to know about Hawaii is that it is a one-party state. Yeah. There's a joke in Hawaii that Cuba will have 2 parties before Hawaii. And there's not one Republican in the state Senate. So this really is, reflecting on Cardinal Dolan's recent op-ed, evidence that when the Democrat Party has total control to work its will, it really closes all of the doors for participation of faithful practicing Catholics.
That's right.
And, even cultural Catholics. I think that you don't have to be a pious Catholic to know that doctors shouldn't be in the business of killing the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, and even beyond that now, because they say suicide is a civil right, and this is a civil rights issue. So if it's a civil rights issue, they don't even want to limit it to adults. They don't want to only limit it to the elderly, the sick, and the disabled. This is open to anyone who wants a doctor to write them a prescription to help them die.
Right. This is so sad. And it's funny, you mentioned cultural Catholics and other Catholics. Cardinal Dolan, of course, recently wrote that op-ed. Well, he said the Democratic Party has slammed the door shut on Catholics. And he's writing this with a sad tone in his voice. I mean, you could tell he was sad about it. He probably comes from a Democrat family. I think he does. Many Irish Catholics especially, but other Catholics as well, belong to the Democratic Party just sort of by tradition in their families. But the way they live is conservative, actually. The way they live is deeply in tune with the principles of our faith, namely especially the one that you bring up often, which is solidarity. These are people who care about each other and about people. And it reminds me a lot of what's happening in Hawaii now, because Hawaii has a culture that cares deeply about people and that has a conservative Christian way of living. It reminds me a lot of what happens with Latino Americans and Black Americans. According to Pew polling, Black Christians were more opposed to gay marriage and more firmly so than any other demographic group. Similarly, I think Catholics and Hawaiians have something in common, which is, in a way, we have our own culture, and that culture is being invaded by progressives. You see what I'm saying?
100%. Well, the campaign is called Kama Aina for Compassionate Choices. Kama Aina means children of the land. And when you go down to the legislature and you see the people pushing this, 90% of them aren't even living here or from here.
Oh, my gosh.
And the other 9% left, they're Howlis that have moved here later in life. Like me, I moved here when I was 17. They're not Kama Aina. One of the leaders in standing up against this is a woman named Colette Machado, a native Hawaiian woman who is the head of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. You have Leon Su, who's a big Hawaiian leader here, a dear friend of mine. Yeah. They don't want to hear the voice of the Hawaiian community. And the Hawaiians are very conservative. They take their faith very serious. I think back to 2 legislative sessions ago, we had a big debate on marriage and on gay marriage. And it was a native Hawaiian state representative, Democrat, a homosexual, who came out and said, I cannot support same-sex marriage. It goes everything against my culture.
Wow.
And I represented a native Hawaiian district. I don't represent gay pride. I represent my community. But of course, Kama Aina, they're not. Compassionate Choices, they're not. Right. They should really call them mainlanders for social experimentation in a distant polity.
Yeah, it's so sad because they like to export social experimentation. Our mutual friend Uju Ekocha, with her new book Target Africa, she talks a lot about that. There you go.
Right,
you got all
desk.
The goods. That's right. But yeah, she talks a lot about it. It reminds me, in my conversations with her, I'm always like, Uju, you come from a small village in Nigeria. I come from a small village in Vermont, and I'm amazed at how much we have in common just because of our faith and our humanity. Like we're exactly the same in the fact that Vermonters, we complain about flatlanders, right? These foreigners coming up from Massachusetts and invading and trying to change our culture and ruining our families, right? And ruining our local culture. Same thing. She's complaining about that from a Nigerian perspective. You're complaining about it from a Hawaiian perspective. Catholics around the world should complain about it from a Catholic perspective.
When I'm in Iraq or when I'm in Sudan, it's the same thing. We have so much in common. And they'll always say, you are a good American, not like the other Americans we meet. Like, well, no, the folks you met from the State Department are not representative of Americans. I am. Right? Mm-hmm. I am an American. I like football. I like the barbecue. I love my children. I have lots of them. I take them, after this, I have to go to dance and karate. And we love our families. This is normal. We are normal Americans. We have so much in common. And Hawaii is the same thing. Now in New England, all the physician-assisted suicide bills that were flying forward in New England, they've all died. Yeah. But yet here in Hawaii, a state that the folks don't want it, but politicians that are easy to, bring on board. And it took them 2 decades. It was on Holy Thursday that the vote took place, and one Catholic state senator began to cry and say this is the hardest decision of her life. And I said to her, because probably I lacked in charity afterwards, I said, why are you crying? I said, you got to play your part in a dystopian novel as Judas on Good Thursday. That's really good timing.
Wow.
But it was on Holy Thursday that all of these Catholic legislators betrayed the vulnerable, kissed the vulnerable on the cheek. And we have to use our imagination to think where this is going. In the age of Tinder, in the age where marriage is going to be a thing of the past for these generations, they don't even date. They're not going to have children. They're not going to have grandchildren or nieces or nephews or cousins. Right. When they get older and when they get sick and when they feel unproductive, they're going to be lured into thinking they're making a choice to die. Just like the young woman who doesn't have a family and doesn't have a support system and feels unloved and is lonely, wanders into an abortion clinic because she despairs, because she doesn't feel loved. Right. This is the Catholic moment. This is the age of the laity. It is our responsibility to tell the truth, that the human person has an inviolable dignity, that we are called to live in solidarity with the suffering, not send them out of our view. A doctor in Hawaii, a friend of mine, Dr. Tommy Cook, testified against physician-assisted suicide. And he said, I, as a doctor, I'm not going to send a patient to a place they cannot return. We did that before in Hawaii. We send people with Hansen's disease, with leprosy, to Kalapapa, to Molokai. Right. And once you went there, you could never return. But what did our great saints do, like St. Damien and St. Marianne? I have my prayer cards like any good Catholic does in his office.
Yeah.
They lived a life of solidarity with the suffering.
Yeah.
And they went to where
they cared for the sick there. Yeah. Just to be clear, these were saints who, motivated by their Catholic faith, went out to those who were shuffled out of sight by the world, and they cared for those who suffered with leprosy off the island. They were totally separated and left to die. In fact, they were maybe being assisted to suicide. They were left for dead. You see,
it was sorrowful, and it was chaos and anarchy when St. Damien arrived. By the way, the culture we have today, we inherited from people like St. Damien, from Queen Emma. There was a queen, and when her people had poor medical care and her kingdom was poor, she went door to door, raising money from merchants and elite and others to build a hospital, to build a medical center. Today, it's the Queen's Medical Center. It's a state-of-the-art, world-renowned medical center.
Right.
That was a gift from Queen Emma, St. Damien. So we live in the shade of trees that were planted a century and more ago. And now our state senator, legislator, and I pray not our governor, they're swinging an axe at these trees. And that's why I was so grateful to see that my bishop, Bishop Larry Silva, wrote an op-ed last week, just a couple days after Cardinal Dolan's op-ed, where he took a brave, prophetic stand for life. And I said to my bishop, I'm so glad you wrote that. I don't know what's going to happen, but I just imagine the Kama Aina, the children of the land 100 years from now, when they look back, I want them to know at least somebody was planting a tree for them when everyone else seemed busy spending their inheritance and throwing their inheritance away.
Yeah. And for our listeners and viewers, pay attention. What's happening here is, you're agents for change in this world, you yourselves, but also it's really important to remember what is happening right now is potentially a major shift. What we're witnessing is Cardinal Dolan. That was an earth-shattering op-ed. Believe it or not, it really makes a difference. He said the Democratic Party has slammed the door on Catholics. Like I said, Dolan is not a guy who unequivocally hates the Democratic Party. This guy's a guy probably from a Democrat family. Many Catholics are. And he's saying, look, this is the straw that broke the camel's back. This is getting ridiculous. He wasn't referring to a physician-assisted suicide specifically necessarily, but just generally cultural leftism has become so central to the Democratic Party's platform that sane people, and particularly Catholics, can't feel at home there anymore. And that's major. Bishop Larry, same thing, weighing in against his own governor and the Senate in Hawaii. More and more bishops are waking up, and many more in the laity are waking up. And CatholicVote itself, not only me as a mouthpiece and our president and our staff, but our listeners and the people who follow us and who are actually the Catholic voters we try to represent, I think we might be looking at a groundswell, a real change.
Yeah, and a lot of Democrats, it's very sad for them because their traditional home, their family's home has been in the Democrat Party. And the Democrat Party, especially in the big cities, was an instrument for them and a tool for them. And it's got to be very hard. And it's not just Catholics, though. This radical identity politics is closing the door on the very people that they say they want to reach out to. It's really closing the door on Latinos. It's really closing the door on blacks. It's closing the door on people that still acknowledge the transcendent value of family, of solidarity. Look, if they target Hawaii with this, our state motto, which was the motto of the Kingdom of Hawaii, is the life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. In Hawaii, it is not uncommon to have 7 names on a mortgage because cousins and aunts and uncles and grandmas, they all live in the same house. In Hawaii, I'm telling you, my friends, they fight over where grandma's going to live, where grandpa's going to live.
Right.
They're not sending them off to an old folks home. The families will really get in heated arguments over whose house, who gets to have grandma live with them. When you go to a movie theater on a Friday night here, it's not like a bunch of kids. It's grandma, grandpa, mom, dad, cousins, nieces, nephews. It's family up and down and wide and across and filling up 4 rows. We're a family culture. We're a culture you'll see lots of children. You'll see lots of Down syndrome children still. Children with disabilities are not being euthanized out of existence through abortion here in Hawaii. So if they can target our state, why do they target us? Because it's culturally seems to be a no-brainer for our culture? No. We voted same-sex marriage down in a bigger margin than any other state. 3-1. It's because we're a small state. We're a one-party state, and that one party is the Democrat Party.
Right.
And so this aggressive, bizarre special interest came here and thought it was they could get the most bang for their buck. They're treating Hawaii as a laboratory. But if you Catholic Democrats listening, watching, if you call your local party if you write the DNC, email the DNC, and you say, I know what you're doing in Hawaii.
Right.
I'm a Democrat. And they put pressure on Ige because they're getting pressure from the other direction. They're getting pressure from mainland special interest groups pushing this bill. There was a lobbyist. The lobbyist that's been carrying water for this bill for years brags about how he has everyone in his pocket. He openly brags about it.
Yeah. It's insidious stuff. And again, I see a great analogy. Catholics around the country and really across the world can look at Hawaii. They can see a foreign ideology. It's actually foreign to human nature, but also foreign to our faith and foreign to Hawaii, trying to invade and change a culture from within, from above, but from within. That's what's happening with our faith in general. I see a great analogy with that. So again, I just hope our viewers and listeners will look at the situation, see themselves in it, and see themselves as agents for change against that in their own lives, in their own states, but also, if they have it within their power, or if they're local to Hawaii, really at their fingertips, they can directly influence this situation. How would you advise they do that?
Well, if you're from Hawaii, you need to call and write Governor Ige. You need to call and write the Democrat Party. And if you're not from Hawaii and you're a Democrat, you're a Catholic Democrat, you take your faith serious. By the way, this isn't from Revelation. This is natural law.
Yeah, human nature.
The Hippocratic Oath wasn't written by bishops, right? But if you're a faithful Catholic Democrat, you need to let your party know that what you're doing in Hawaii, what you did to Lipinski in Illinois, it's just not staying in Illinois. What you did to Lipinski in Chicago, we can see in Ohio. What you're doing to the people of Hawaii, we can see in Pennsylvania. Let the party know. I can tell you from a friend of mine in the DNC that Dolan op-ed rocked the DNC.
Wow.
And so right now, they've got their antenna up looking for frustrated Catholic Democrats. And if you're a Republican, here's what I say. If they push this on Hawaii, we need to rout this. This party needs to cease to exist as a major political party because it has moved itself outside of what it is to be an American, outside of the Western tradition, and it is shrinking to some bizarre ideological party that, should exist in Europe in the 1930s, not in the United States today.
It's so foreign. That's right. All right, well, thank you very much, Jason. We've been talking, of course, with Jason Jones. He is the head of the Vulnerable Peoples Project. You can find his work at thegreatcampaign.org, and also keep an eye out for what I usually talk to you about is movies, production of movies. So keep an eye out for that as well. You give the word when there's a really life-supporting Catholic principles bolstering movie on the way. So keep us posted.
I'll give you
on
a hint.
that.
There's a big movie coming in September, and I can't wait to tell you about it.
All right. I look forward to that. Thanks again, Jason. We'll talk to you soon. Now the time has come for our weekly political discussion with Catholic Vote Political Director Josh Mercer, and we have Josh right here on the line. Josh, how are you?
Hey, things are going great.
Well, is everything going great for religious liberty?
It's been a good week for religious liberty, yes. 2 developments have come up, and it's giving Catholics reasons to be happy. The first of which is, we've heard a lot of discussion over the years about the HHS mandate. President Trump came into office, and he signed some executive actions. He had the press conference with the Little Sisters of the Poor at the White House.
Right.
Catholic Vote President Brian Birch was there. Big celebration, but the thing is, it didn't immediately happen all at once. The reason why is because when Obama put that executive order in regarding the HHS mandate, it takes a while for that to be unwound. The Obama Justice Department, right, the Department of Justice, Health and Human Services, issued that mandate, and lots of different Catholic organizations from EWTN, the Catholic Benefits Association, Little Sisters of the Poor, they went to federal court all across the country to defend their constitutional right to religious liberty. Right. Well, Trump gets into office. He puts new people in at the Justice Department. It's not like you can flip a switch, Stephen. They got to unwind a lot of this stuff. And they can't just say, oh, never mind, we're not suing these Catholics anymore. It takes a while to make sure you unwind it properly.
Right. And people could miss it. That's why I'm pretty happy. I mean, people could miss good news like this because of how it unfolds. But fortunately, the people who really understand what a good week this was are the people who read The Loop from Catholic Vote and listen to our programming. These people know what's up. But so what is it that happened this week? The sort of culmination.
Well, what happened is, the Catholic Benefits Association, which represents over 1,000 different healthcare providers, was still following through and trying to defend their rights in federal court. And what happened was a federal judge in Oklahoma by the name of David Russell put the kibosh on this. He put down an injunction against the HHS mandate nationwide. And so basically the HHS mandate is finally stopped dead in its tracks, which is great news. And actually, I always like to point out this. Why are judges so important? This judge that did this, Judge Russell, he was appointed by President Ronald Reagan in his first year in office.
Wow.
That's how long this guy's been in office. And he's been, he did something good for us this week, okay? But it just shows you how important these judicial nominations are. He was put in office in December 1981. And here it is, 2018, and he's standing up for our First Amendment right to religious liberty. So it's great news.
Yeah, I don't know how you do it, Josh. I mean, because you're kind of a political expert, and you have to pay attention to these things with such long-term storylines that most of us would never even notice, right? But you're like, this guy that was appointed the first year of President Reagan's time in office, and then he comes back to bite Democrats in the butt.
What I love about this, too, is that the New York Times used to run stories in the 1980s, horrified that Ronald Reagan was not only nominating people to the bench, like every president should, not only was he nominating super conservative, ultra uber conservatives, but the New York Times would say, they're all so young. And they're terrified that, he's not just picking some 70-year-old guy, he's putting someone who's maybe 35, 40 years old who could be on the bench. Russell, he's been on the bench since 1981. He's 75. So he's been able to serve for 37 years.
Right. That kind of reminds me of the reaction to Roberts under Bush and then the reaction to Gorsuch. Maybe some of the ire from the left may have come from the fact that Gorsuch, looks pretty good, like age-wise.
Well, yeah, and the point I like to make is that Gorsuch is only about 7-8 years older than I am, so it gives you an idea how long he could serve on the Supreme Court.
But he has such good hair.
Well, you'd like to think that the left could maintain some modest amount of civility, but no, I mean, there were commentators that were saying that I hope Clarence Thomas's wife feeds him fatty foods, that he'll die and not be on the court for too long. I mean, the stuff that people say in politics, in polite society, is just terrible. But I'm very happy by the fact that the judicial nominations that Trump has made have been great. From Gorsuch, as you mentioned, lots of different people, even in the federal courts. Like, unless you're from Minnesota, have you heard of Judge Strauss? He was on the Minnesota Supreme Court. He's great. He's now on the federal bench. So there's lots of these guys. He could be someone who could be on the Supreme Court a few years down the road. So who knows? But the point I like to make to people is that if Chuck Schumer becomes the Senate Majority Leader next year and the Democrats only need 2 seats to flip, then all the judicial nominations, including a possible Supreme Court nomination, if that comes, are going to be put immediately to a screeching halt because Chuck Schumer is not going to allow any judicial nominees to be confirmed if he's the majority leader. So this is a great victory for religious liberty, but I always like to bring it back to judges because so often our federal judges act as if there's some sort of a permanent constitutional convention that can just decide whether or not we have religious liberty or if we have free speech or the right to self-defense.
Oh my gosh, and under Trump it's been just like all-out war. It's amazing. They're pretty blatant about saying, we represent the left, as if they have sort of a constituency rather than a constitutional duty.
Right.
And we are going to stop anything Trump. They're so intemperate about it, like they've lost their tempers over especially immigration, but other things as well. It's just quite a sight to behold.
Right. So, I mean, the intersection between religious liberty and, of course, the judges issue is very important. I always try to make that. But also, I want to talk about the second development of religious liberty. And that doesn't have to do as much with judges, but it has to do with the importance of the executive branch, as the President of the United States has the ability to put people in office. Obviously, we hear about people in the cabinet, like the Secretary of State and Defense and stuff like that. But there's other lower level positions that are very important still. And he nominated former Congresswoman Heather Wilson. She was a Republican Congresswoman from New Mexico. She is by no means a strong conservative. Her own words, she's a moderate.
Right.
But here's what happened. Back in the Obama administration, a member of the Air Force, a colonel, was asked if he would sign this little certificate of appreciation or something like that, recognizing somebody underneath his command, that person's same-sex spouse, as it were.
Right.
And this colonel said, you know something, that just kind of goes against my religious beliefs as a Christian. But what he did is he directed that person that was his subordinate to somebody that was above him in command and said, why don't you sign this, certificate, because you're not going to have a problem with it, whereas I have a bit of a religious issue, endorsing something like this.
Right.
And he got immediately slapped down by the Obama administration. He was supposed to be promoted being a one-star general. They put the stop on that. And in fact, there was orders from on high, don't promote this guy. So he suffered quite a bit. And this gets to me about the topic of
by the way, I had the same thing. I mean, this is a normal married couple thing to do. When I got married, I went out to people and said, hey, I want you to congratulate me or I'll ruin your career. And what do you think of my wife? Aren't you happy for us? And we're going to have a traditional, marriage, and you have to endorse this. It's so obviously aggressive,
Well, I mean, the thing is, there's no evidence that this colonel had done any discrimination against any persons that were under his command, that he was treating people that with same-sex attraction differently or anything like that. From all accounts, he was doing his job just fine. It's just that he didn't want to sign a document, which made it seem like he thought this was a great idea. Right. And he just said, look, I'm not going to be a problem here. I'm going to try to, I'll direct you to somebody who'd be willing to go ahead and do this, which I think is a great remedy, something he probably didn't even have to do, which I think that was gracious on his part. But still, nonetheless, this is why the administrative state can be so powerful. They wanted to make a lesson of Colonel Bohannon. They wanted to make sure people got the message, don't go against anything like this. You need to play ball, or your career might get hurt, and that might affect when you can retire, what your benefits are like. There, a lot of stuff like that. You've invested 20-some years into the military. You don't want to jeopardize something like that just because of, it's just a piece of paper, And he stood strong for what he believed. And Heather Wilson, as I said, she became Secretary of the Air Force. She was a veteran, so natural fit. And she just said, listen, he shouldn't have been disciplined. He was perfectly within his rights to go along and find somebody else. And she said
this was this week, right?
Yeah, it just happened just a few days ago. So the Secretary of the Air Force, Heather Wilson, said, we have no problem with Colonel Bohannon's actions or behavior. He did everything fine. So it was just nice to have his record cleared once and for all, that he didn't do anything wrong. So that's an important step. I mean, the thing is, that's why the First Amendment Defense Act, which is legislation on Capitol Hill, sponsored by Senator Mike Lee and others, that just says, look, if you believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, or if you're an organization like Catholic Charities that believes that marriage is between a man and a woman, the federal government is not going to discriminate against you. That's what that legislation would do.
Right.
You're not going to get punished if you're in the Air Force, if you're in the Postal Service, so working for the Social Security Administration, you would not be punished. And if the federal government decides, hey, we want to help people out with disaster relief, or we're going to help people who are victims of sex trafficking, they're not going to make an issue of, wait a minute, we can't work with Catholic Charities because they believe marriage is between a man and a woman. That's nonsense.
It's funny.
Why we need that First Amendment Defense Act.
With the First Amendment Defense Act, it reminds me of the debates initially over same-sex marriage in 2015. Where we were saying we are worried that if this passes, it will be used to punish people with Orthodox Christian and Jewish beliefs. Right. And they said, nonsense, we're never going to hurt anybody. Well, the First Amendment Defense Act now is saying, okay, fine, you have a Obergefell, but at least we're going to make sure that you don't use it to punish people for their religious beliefs. And they're saying, no, we want to punish people. Why should this be controversial?
We know this because the ACLU is going after Catholic Charities adoption services.
Right.
Their ACLU is going after hospitals for abortion, but that doesn't involve marriage. But they're going after all sorts of different things. Well, why should we use this Catholic organization to help sex trafficking victims because they won't refer for abortion? Why would we want to work with Catholic Charities because they won't adopt kids to same-sex couples? So it's one thing to say the federal government should get completely out of adoption. It should get completely out of trying to help sex trafficking victims. We can have that debate.
Yeah.
But if we're going to have it involved, the question is, why on earth would we say we don't want Catholic organizations involved? Because the fact is, with regards to adoption or fighting sex trafficking, Catholic organizations have been involved in these fights and helping people in need for decades. Yeah. Why would you shut them out because you disagree with their opinion on marriage?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. 2 victories in 1 week. That's more than usual. That's nice. And I'm glad he got that red letter removed from him, because it also took the target off of many people's backs and really actually sets us greatly at ease. You know, I know people in the military who are shaking in their boots over this stuff.
But a lot of this stuff, though, like the HHS mandate, and also with what happened with Colonel Bohannon, these were changes that ultimately started from the Trump administration. And unfortunately, we do not yet have legislative, concrete fixes for these. So if the next president comes in office, he could appoint someone else in the Air Force that could say, no, this guy, it probably won't be Colonel Bohannon in this case, but it might be someone else down the road. And they won't have that protection. So that's why we really do need to have the First Amendment Defense Act. So we have legislative support for these kind of things.
Right. This is good stuff to know. And Josh, we want to keep in the loop on other stories like this. Hopefully next week we'll have 2 good triumph stories again. But how do we keep in the loop on this? Tell our viewers here. Viewers and listeners now.
Go to CatholicVote.org/loop and sign up for a free daily briefing. We just try to cover a lot of these topics. And also we keep you up to date with, the saint of the day, and always try to throw something fun or interesting in there. And it's a great way to start your day. So sign up for the loop at CatholicVote.org.
All right, you heard the man. All right, thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Stephen. Talk to you later. I'm not gonna get home.
And now I'm joined by Deanna Falchook, who has a great response to a very silly and bumbling tweet from a Planned Parenthood center from last week. Last week, Planned Parenthood tweeted something to the effect of, "We need to have a Disney princess who has had an abortion." And Deanna, your comeback was gobsmacking and wonderful, and it was in the form of an article at Medium called "I Was a Disney Princess and Had an Abortion." It's a tragic story that ends in redemption, nonetheless. So thank you, first of all, for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here with you today. Thank you for having me.
So one thing that I just think you have a wonderful insight, it's a really original and important insight that could be applied in so many ways. In your piece, what you do is it's almost like you're looking through the eyes of the child who says the emperor has no clothes. And telling and reassuring that child in all of us not to be intimidated when people say, "Oh, shut up, you don't know."
Right.
Because in a way, it's almost like you're saying, you know what? The classical categories in fairy tales of good guys and bad guys are played out in real life. So look out for the bad guys, and you should be on the side of the princess. It's a really beautiful piece.
Yeah, and the amazing thing is that we know our fairy tales and our princesses because it's so ingrained in a good way into our, into our psyche, into who we are. And I believe that for people who maybe, aren't in, let's say, church or listening to the Bible stories, this is where we start. We start with the fairy tales, and yet they have the stories of redemption, of, being able to rise above the ashes into a place on high. It's the Jesus story. And so it basically woke me up because I'd been writing about Cinderella and working on a book, but I hadn't really been blogging out about my personal experience in a while. And I just had to, because it was like worlds collided. Disney princesses and abortions, and I just felt like I needed to say something and respond.
Yeah, well, I mean, it may be a God-given opportunity.
Yeah.
Providence works in funny ways. And it's funny that you get such an important moral message from something that most of us would see as, something we would dismiss as a thing of childhood, right?
Yeah.
With Disney princesses. And you're taking these stories and you're saying, no, I'm going to analyze them. And frankly, what you're doing is you're analyzing them in a classical way.
Yes.
These, from the perspective of a Christian. A Christian is a timeless being, in a way. And in other words, you're refusing to just say, these are stories about, girl power from 2018.
And what does it mean to truly be empowered? I've been thinking a lot about, Planned Parenthood and, the subject of choice when they discuss, having an abortion as if that empowers you. From my personal experience, and I'm raising 4 daughters. I have 7 children and a son-in-law all together. So I'm teaching my kids. My personal experience is that when we walk through the unplanned, unexpected chapters of our lives, and sometimes it's grueling, like those princesses. Sometimes it's like we're slaying dragons and having to face the evil witches or the evil ones in our lives in order to conquer and find our place into the top of the castle. And so I really felt strongly about this. It's just brought up so much. In 1 week, what this has brought up, the dialogue, the women and men know these stories. And it's like it's always been there, but we don't really discuss it. And one temporary, let's say air quotes, accidental tweet that was pulled back brought up so much that is so deep in our hearts that it's been amazing. I mean, a whole movement is being created from this one accidental tweet.
Before we get to that, why don't you, this would be a good time to go back and tell your story, because it also is a story of, you can return from wherever you've been, and there's redemption. And it's a very moving story. Could you share that with us?
Sure. So I was raised by my awesome mother. She was a single mother because my parents were divorced. And then I had 3 sisters. And then I had all of these amazing great aunts who were my grandmother's sisters. And I remember as a child saying, they'd say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I'd say, I want to be a mother. And then they meant well, because their messaging, the messaging that they had was that we need to rise above the oppression that we're in as housewives or whatever. It was kind of a false messaging, but it was brought into the next generation. So that when I grew up, because I said, all right, then I guess I have to be something else first. I have to aspire and accomplish before I can reach my dream. My personal dream was to be a mother. So I was very talented, and I was a singer, and I ended up getting a great job as a teenager working at Disney in front of the castle, singing 5 days a week, doing the recordings. It was so much fun. And I was 18 and I ended up getting pregnant. And at that point where I will tell you, I was, away from the Lord, I sort of grew up in this environment where, women could choose. And also in the entertainment business, everybody, that's what they do, right? Mm-hmm. So no pressure from Disney because they did not know. But I made a decision to have an abortion, expecting I would feel relieved and go back to work on Monday. And I went back to work on Monday, and I started singing and dancing, and I felt like the life force was sucked out of me. It's like I did not, and that's kind of a very appropriate metaphor, but I literally had a hard time dancing and singing, and I started to have these unexpected, I was never a person that fell into depression or anything like that, but I had lost, I would just curl up in a ball when I would go home. And so eventually I quit the job that I was trying to save, broke up with the boyfriend that, I was trying to keep, and wanted to kill myself. Eventually, it was like in that moment, my mother called me, when I was really contemplating this. She did not know either. And I thought, I can't do this because of her. It's like she's a single mother that raised these girls. We were her life. And I felt devastated by my decision at my loss of my child, who, a lot of people could easily say you didn't even know this child, but I knew this child in my heart. Mm-hmm. And to think what that would do with her. So I basically just got strong and just stood up and went on with my life. But I found forgiveness in the Lord, and I found I started to study why I did that and what it was and what messaging and what is it? It's just this. It's an indoctrination in our minds, right? So I pulled out of it, though, married a great guy, had a daughter, praised God, said to the Lord, if nothing else in my life ever happens that's amazing, that's fine. I have this redemption story in this one child. And then when she was 5 or 6, I took her to Disney. And when we got there, I'm sorry, this text thing's going off, but sorry. I was able to, I was there for a few days, and I conceived my son while I was there. And then, so that was amazing. The first time back, I conceive a child, and I'm thinking, the Lord is just showering me and lavishing me with love. And, there's no shame. There's he favors me, and he loves and adores me. And then I went on to have a calling to adopt. And when I ended up wanting to adopt, my first reaction was like, oh no, life is perfect. I have a boy and a girl. Who am I to think that I should adopt? But it was a calling from the Lord. And I adopted it.
Can't ignore those.
Yeah. I adopted a little girl from Guatemala that we named Matea, which means gift from God. She was born to a 14-year-old woman. Then we adopted 3 children from Ethiopia whose parents died of AIDS, and they watched the mother die. It was devastating. And then in 2011, we adopted my son Alec, who was labeled, he's from Ukraine, he was 5 years old, 2 days old, he was abandoned by his mother, labeled invalid. And when we went to get him, they said, we're really happy you came, because we were about to transfer him from the baby home to a place where children as healthy as him have been dead within 6 months because of the rampant abuse. They were going to transfer him to the equivalent to an adult mental institution, just because he was 5 and an orphan. So our family now consists of 7 kids, and my oldest daughter is married, so I have a son-in-law, and we live now next to Disney World, and we go into the parks every day. And the Lord placed upon my heart being able to use these stories of princesses and fairy tales as a way to communicate with people and to really share the strength of redemption and power and true authority through him, and elevate our longing to be near the King, and so I was working on that when all this happened.
Wow, yeah. That's beautiful. I think one of the most important things, and I really do think it's inspired, you have this insight about almost in a childlike way, taking as valid the categories of good and evil that we see portrayed so clearly in fairy tales for children.
Yeah.
There are good guys and bad guys. I was talking to you before the call about Snidely Whiplash. You remember him?
Yes.
And I often come across people who are basically Snidely Whiplash. Everything is there except for the waxed mustache and top hat. And I think, how does this person get away with it? How is this person viewed as a good person, and how do they view themselves as a good person when they so classically embody the sort of stand-in for the devil, their way they're behaving? And it's funny. That's one of the things you pointed out in your great piece. Is Planned Parenthood might be really upset about Disney princesses as they are, these classic stories about virtue, really, and about redemption, because they're not very satisfied with the role that they play. You know what I mean? It looks a lot like, the witch who's after the princess.
There's so much perfection in the stories that Disney has chosen to highlight already, which, by the way, aren't originally Disney stories. They're ancient fairy tales. And so Planned Parenthood, what got me the most is, even though they brought back their tweet and took it off, is that I started to think about them sitting around a table trying to create a new dialogue and a new indoctrination for children as young as 2 or 3 years old. And remember, my story is that I was indoctrinated. I had to wait to become, and that's why I chose an abortion, because I had this messaging. We were told, they used the word in a derogatory way, barefoot and pregnant.
Here's the thing, though, that really bothers me is that that's unique to you as a woman. I can't be pregnant.
Exactly.
I can't raise a child. I can't do the things that women can do. That's a unique gift to womankind. And also, they can relate, and a lot of these fairy tales were written allegorically by Christians. They can relate to Christ the King and Christ the Prince of Peace in a way that men cannot, in a very special way. Someday my prince will come, the aria from Snow White. They can say that of God in a way that men really kind of can't. We don't relate to God in the same way. There's something very special that God has gifted women with in the way that they relate to him as their prince, as their king.
Right.
Isn't there?
Yes, and pro-choice feminists despise the aspect of rescue, of any kind of what they perceive as the dialogue they want to show about submission and male and female coming together, to truly identify this power in life. And so they despise that. But the thing about, making a Disney princess that would cut off life, and like you said, it's so unique to us, is basically, for one thing, they don't understand the stories or the power or what they're getting into. Number one, they don't grasp. They haven't spent any time really looking into who Cinderella, Snow White, or what these stories do. If they did, they wouldn't even suggest that. And number two, they have to make it sound like the greatest act of control that we could have is to just annihilate another life inside of us. And from personal experience, like I said, when we move through these times in our lives that are difficult, and I have talked to women who have been raped, I have talked to women who have, all kinds of women, and, there's an aspect of moving through your pain and suffering. If we come together and talk about how can we battle through this and turn this into a miracle? How can we turn this into a miracle? So the thing about Disney, and this is something that's really important, this is getting more into statistics, but I was reading this morning because in February they came out with their new numbers of attendance. Every year, if you look at all of just the theme parks, not the overall Disney company, just the theme parks, there's about 140, 150 million people that come in to attend. They are drawn there. They hear the story of good triumphing over evil. All of this, they look at Cinderella's castle or Snow White's castle. So they know the stories, they're drawn to it. And my call to Christians and to anybody who really is concerned about the decline of the church is to be aware of, if you're a missionary and you're on the mission field, the greatest way to evangelize is to speak in their language. So I believe that the fairy tales, that people understand that, and that is a great starting point. If somebody's like, well, I don't really, they're turned away from the Catholic culture or the Christian culture in general, but maybe they're like, you can break the ice by talking about what they know about conquering good and evil in Cinderella, Snow White, whatever story that you choose. It's evangelism at its best. It may be veiled in a way, but it's very wise during the times that we're living in, when culture is outperforming Christianity overall, to be able to consider different ways of communicating. I mean, Planned Parenthood understands how powerful it is to communicate these things. I mean, they're sitting.
That's why they're trying to get their claws on. That's why they're trying to get their claws on Disney princesses. They want that to become their messenger. Yeah. Exactly.
So we need to look at these stories and find the beauty and find we don't even have to change the stories much. We just need to highlight what it means and what it is in life. There will be unexpected times. There will be surprises. We will have to battle evil. It's just the reality of the world that we live in. I mean, if anybody is more warrior princess-like, it's the Christian and Catholic women that I know that have endured struggles and have come out on the other side glistening after being in the fire.
Amen. Yeah, that's my wife, by the way. That's many women I admire. That's awesome. And I think you're right. I think that's very right. I think what you're doing is you're speaking in cartoon clarity, and that's really what it is.
That's a great line.
In bright colors, in a way that vivid expression of reality in fairy tales sometimes surpasses the dreariness of the messaging of the villains in this world, and it might win out in the end. I think really you are gifted. This is a very special gift, this message. I think it's going to go places. By the way, just on the way out, I do want to give you a chance to pitch the fact that you are writing a book on this, which I'm very excited about.
Yes.
You've written about it in a new column, follow-up column at Medium entitled Pro-Life Princesses Unite in Defense of Cinderella. So tell us about that really briefly before I let you go.
First off, in the past week, a movement has grown. We have a Facebook private group called Pro-Life Princesses, which is amazing. So you can find that by finding me on Facebook, Deanna Falchook, and there will be a link there. Or just read my article, and there's a link at the bottom there from Medium. But I am writing a book called The Cinderella Mindset, and it's really about, I started just wanting to write about leadership traits that she has, but I'm working on that, and we are all getting together even now with dialogues about this topic, because, I mean, you would not believe how amazing these women are that are stepping forward and sharing. They're powerful women of God.
Amen. Awesome. I can't wait to see where this goes. Please keep us in the loop, keep us updated on this. Listeners, again, we've been talking with Deanna Falchook, who has a great and inspiring story. She is a Disney princess. She did have an abortion. We don't need that again. But she came out of the other end of it with a story very unlike what Planned Parenthood wanted, what they had in mind in Disney Princess. So thank you again, Deanna, and I look forward to keeping in touch. Do keep us posted.
Will do. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you. Well, that's it for this week. This has been the Stephen Herreid Show, the show that's faster than a speeding bullet but doesn't have any kryptonite. I'm your host, Stephen Herreid. See you next week.
What you got on your mind? Oh, yeah, baby.